The link between humanitarian and development interventions is a subject that has been debated for many years. On the ground, it is a complex challenge. This challenge was met by the European Commission with a food security thematic programme. The recently approved programme states that a joint humanitarian development framework should be prepared in each beneficiary country. But first, this requires a strong desire to work together. Delegations, experts from ECHO, colleagues working at the headquarters in DevCo and ECHO, and, if possible, partners in the fight against hunger. It's mostly an exercise at grassroots level. It is important to recognise that this exercise is not simply a procedure, but rather a joint process. A process in which everyone learns from others and, in turn, teaches others, as indeed everyone sees the food crisis according to one's own position and responsibilities. It is proposed to prepare the joint humanitarian development framework in 5 steps. Step 1. Participants exchange ideas about the nature of the crisis to take advantage of the vision of each. This is not the place to analyse the crisis in depth, but to understand and set its context. Step 2. Participants identify the most vulnerable population that should be targeted. Step 3. They perform a joint analysis of all the causes that explain the vulnerability and food insecurity in this population. Step 4. The participants identify their respective interventions, past, current or planned, that address these causes. Step 5. After analysing the coherence of such interventions, an agreement is reached on priorities and on the joint humanitarian development framework. Let's see how these steps have been applied to a theoretical situation, though one inspired by the recent flooding in Burkina Faso. This exercise was conducted with colleagues in the delegations of Mali and Burkina Faso, with experts from the ECHO regional office in Dakar and the ECHO office in Burkina Faso. In the first stage, everyone is invited to present one's own vision of the disaster. Is this an exceptional disaster, or a repetitive event that this time has had a dramatic impact because of other aggravating factors? The second step is to identify together the most vulnerable population affected by the flooding that have, as a result, very precarious food security. Here, 300,000 already vulnerable people have been affected by the disaster. Our goal is to promote sustainable food security for this population. Now for the analysis of the causes. The colour of each arrow has a special meaning. The first effect of the flooding is the destruction of much infrastructure and many assets at different levels. In the diagram, these levels are represented by separate columns. Large dams of national importance are placed in the national level column. Provincial highways, trunk roads, are placed in the column provincial level, and so on. The following slides include the analysis of the household and individual levels. The violence of the flood was exacerbated when the dams and dikes suddenly gave way, forming a destructive wave of water. The destruction of productive assets significantly damaged the livelihoods of the affected population. Markets have been destroyed by the floods, and their functioning has been indirectly affected by the destruction of feeder roads. In turn, rising food prices had already aggravated the financial situation of the poorest households. The loss or partial destruction of livelihoods has had a direct impact on household members who no longer had access to food, healthcare, housing and education. All previously identified causes are the direct or indirect result of the flooding. They are also the result of poor sectorial policies. Dams have failed because they were not maintained. The most vulnerable people lost everything because they were not alerted due to the malfunction of the warning system. This chain reaction of causes, effects, causes quickly led to worsening food insecurity and the overall deterioration of living conditions of all household members. It is possible that the European Commission has interventions that are already underway or are programmed or are foreseen for possible future planning that may have significance in addressing the issues identified. But these programs were prioritized under different circumstances and by different mandates, ECHO, DEVCO. The European Commission now needs to define and validate its priorities on the basis of the joint analysis presented in the previous step. In this case, the priority for the European Commission is to act with other donors and with its national partner to address a diverse set of causes that contributed most to the extreme vulnerability of poor populations affected by the disaster. Let's now identify, in the current example, all these actions, whether underway or planned. ECHO provided emergency aid to save lives, to strengthen the livelihoods of households, and then to restore feeder roads through Food for Work. There are scheduled or planned interventions supported by the Food Security Thematic Programme and a special allocation from Envelope B. The European Commission, in partnership with the country, has pledged cooperation on the formulation and implementation of an infrastructure policy. At regional level, the Commission will support a reforestation programme designed by its regional partners. Each of the interventions previously identified must be analysed to ensure that it matches the scale of the problem. It is possible that an intervention, current or planned, may require significant improvement or reorientation in order to contribute to the common objective, that is to say, to promote food security of the population affected by the disaster. The fifth step is to analyse the coherence of the Commission's interventions. This step will help identify gaps, unnecessary duplication, and possible contradictions. It will also address issues of sustainability and consider options for an exit strategy for the humanitarian intervention. Gaps must be identified. In this diagram, one can see that additional interventions are needed, otherwise the whole strategy and ultimately food security may be compromised. For example, in this case it would seem reasonable to help rebuild houses, but this makes no sense from a sustainability point of view, unless a management plan for flood-prone areas has been made. Some actions can be supported by both humanitarian and development interventions. Is this an unnecessary duplication or synergy? Some actions can have perverse effects, such as the provision of long-term food aid that could have a negative effect on the local market. Finally, how can we contribute to the sustainability of actions and develop an exit strategy for ECHO if policies at provincial and national levels are not made effective? The analysis also indicates that the different interventions should be carried out at the right time and in a logical sequence. In this case, the actions have been grouped in 5 phases from 0 to 4. In Phase 0, ECHO launches an emergency response to save lives. In Phase 1, it was planned to initiate actions to restore livelihoods. However, the flashing boxes in the diagram show where there is an immediate need to integrate interventions that had originally been scheduled for later. This is due to the risk of rebuilding in an unprotected flood zone, or the lack of any action to improve the feeder roads which blocks the economic development of households and villages. Similarly, support for the country's education policy must be incorporated in Phase 2. Otherwise, the plan for the reconstruction of schools risks being incoherent. We must also ensure that the rehabilitation of roads meets good standards and that their maintenance will be provided for as part of a national policy, the reform of which should also receive immediate support. In Phase 3, it makes no sense to rehabilitate irrigation systems unless the dams and dikes are also rebuilt. Phase 4 is not particularly time-sensitive. It is now possible to design a coherent plan of action that integrates humanitarian actions and those of development. The components of the joint plan are organized chronologically and by level of intervention. Actions are also broken down by program. Blue, Humanitarian Program, DG ECHO and ECHO's offices. Pink, Thematic Development Programs, Delegation, DevCo and Country Partners. Yellow, Geographic Development Programs, Delegation, DevCo, plus the government. Pale green, Regional Programs, Regional Delegations, DevCo and official regional structures and other partners. Light blue, Interventions of other donors. The methodology presented here should be applied, tested and improved with the participation of us all. It is recommended that the preparation of a joint humanitarian development framework is conducted in a participatory manner through a seminar or a series of meetings. Information is available on the ROSA website. A big thank you to the colleagues who participated in the preparation of this presentation. Cyprien Fabre, Sigrid Kulche, Jan Escanar and Jean-Louis Mossa from the ECHO Regional Office in Dakar, Ronan Pecheur, Delegation of Burkina Faso, and Eric Pitois, ECHO Office in Burkina Faso, Alan Hoyo, Delegation of Mali, Juan-Louis Prades, DevCo Unit R7, and thank you all for your attention.